Omega is probably one of my favorite watch brands. There's something about them that is rather special and they've grabbed my attention for a very long time. But there's something about their watches in their collection that stopped me buying them. Now there's quite a few reasons, including the price, but there's more than just the price stopping me buying them. There are multiple reasons why watches from Omega, albeit I love them, I don't actually want to own them. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about watches. And today, I want to talk to you about Omega because Omega is one of my favourite watch brands. And I've loved Omega ever since my brother bought his Speedmaster GMT over 10 years ago. When he bought that watch, I got to see it, look at it, experience it, wear it, and think, wow, there's something rather special about this watch. Not just the quality, but the look, the design, and in particular, I love the bracelet on that watch. But as much as I like that watch, I've known even when I first saw it, that it's not a watch that I wanted to buy. Even the other Speedmasters within the range, which I've had some hands-on experience with, they really impressed me. I really like them, but I also know that I don't want to buy them. The Planet Ocean, well, that is a watch I really like. A watch that I've had some experiences with. That was even on my sort of grail list. But there's some issues with that one that might stop me buying that one too. Partly the dimensions, but also probably partly because of the price as well. Stand by with that one. In a few years' time, maybe that will change, but at this point in time, I'm not looking to buy that one either. Then, of course, there is the Speedmaster, which again, I really like, but it's not a watch that I'm going to buy. In fact, the Moonwatch is probably the least desirable Speedmaster that I've seen. It's nice and I have nothing against it, and hey, I'd love to get some hands-on experience with it, but I know that I don't want to buy it. I've seen some of the sort of Speedmaster reduced or some of the other sort of variations of Speedmaster which have piqued my interest occasionally. And in fact, there was a Speedmaster triple date that captured my attention a few weeks ago. A watch that I thought, wow, that is amazing. This one was a 40mm case diameter, 20mm lug width, and it was priced around 3,700 Australian dollars. And this watch was in impeccable condition. And it grabbed me because it lined up with something else that had been going on with me. I'd been selling some watches, downsizing it, and putting some money into my sort of watch budget. And that watch budget was starting to climb to some reasonable amounts of money. And I suddenly had this thought that, oh, I could buy an Omega Speedmaster. In particular, this triple date, which I really like the look of. I really like the size of, and it's within a price range that I could possibly buy. So seeing that watch pop up for that price, a price range that seemed a lot to me, but still achievable for me at that time, I thought, wow, I could own an Omega. So I ended up going down to a bit of a rabbit hole. I started looking at all the Omega watches. I started looking at all the different reduced Speedmasters, and I started thinking, oh, there are a good range. And this one that I'd found, it was really nice. I really liked the look of, perfect dimensions. And I thought, oh, it's so much money, but I could buy this if I want to. Should I buy it? And I did consider it. I thought about it a lot. And I thought, yes, it's a huge amount of money, but it's an Omega, it's a Speedmaster, it's a Speedmaster that is the sort of size that I want, but I didn't end up buying it. And that is because I asked myself a question. I asked myself, if this was the exact same watch, but it wasn't an Omega, what if it said Hamilton on the dial, or maybe Oris on the dial, or Christopher Ward on the dial, watches that I like? If it was that, would I still love the watch as much as I do? Would I be willing to pay this sort of money for that sort of watch? And the answer was no. I wouldn't pay that amount of money for those brands, and I wouldn't pay that amount of money for a watch that looked like that. I do like the look of it. I was tempted to buy it, but I think the brand name was pushing me towards buying it. I liked it, I liked the dimensions, I liked the look of it, but there was this big push from behind saying, it's an Omega, you should buy this one. So I'm glad I recognised that and I didn't purchase it. Because really, at this point in my watch collecting career, probably that is too much money to spend. But also, it's too much money to spend on a watch that probably isn't the right watch for me. What did happen, however, is I then get to sort of look at more Omegas, be a bit more open to other Omegas, and search for other Omegas. And when I did that, I came across a watch that made me think, wow. I came across the Dynamic Chronograph. A watch that when I asked myself the question, if this wasn't an Omega, would I still like it? And I instantly said, yes, I love this watch. I love the look of it. I love the style of it. I like the size of it. I like the design of it. I like this watch. And thankfully, these ones are selling less than that Omega Speedmaster that I'd seen. So I started doing a bit of a search for these watches, and I was able to find one in very, very good condition for less than 2,500 Australian dollars. Now, I have to admit, that's still a huge amount of money. So I still then did put a lot of thought into this watch buying decision. But since I'd been selling some watches and this purchase was going to be funded by the sale of those watches, I made a bit of a leap of faith and I pressed buy it now. I bought this Omega Dynamic Chronograph. And guys, if you're watching this because you're considering buying this watch, or after watching this video you may start thinking, maybe I should buy this one too, there's something you need to know about it. There's something that hasn't been mentioned on any review about this watch that concerned me a little bit because it's something that really, really makes a big difference. And I want to share that with you. But there's also something else I want to share with you. Normally I wouldn't do a first impressions video for a second-hand watch, especially a watch that is almost 20 years old. And this watch is 20 years old, but I want to share it with you because there's something rather special about this watch. There's other things I want to show you about this watch, but there's one thing that I need to share with you about this watch. So let's flip the camera and let me show you my new purchase of my first Omega. So here we have the biggest purchase I've ever made, slightly nervous about buying it, slightly excited about buying it, and now that it is in hand, I am so happy that I did make that leap of faith and spend that bit extra money to buy my first Omega. And when I first picked it up, when it first arrived, there were 5 things that really stood out to me. One of which, if you're thinking about purchasing this one, you really, really need to be aware of. And I'm going to start with that one because it's important and it's something that I didn't expect. And it has to do with this bracelet. It is a really, really nice bracelet. It really looks nice. It feels nice. The tolerances are really good. You know, this watch is 20 years old, but it is really nice. But you'll see how close those gaps are together. This thing strips all the hair off your wrist to the point where I've actually had to trim my arm hair a bit to allow myself to wear this watch, which is not something I really sort of do normally, but I couldn't really wear the watch with this bracelet without doing that because I was picking arm hairs out of this more than any other watch I've ever experienced. And that is even those sort of Casios that you sort of pick up that are known to do this. This is worse. I know that there is something, which is the second point that I'm going to talk about, is that this watch is in brand new condition, which is actually really surprising. I was expecting it to be good because they listed it as good quality, but it is in brand new condition, including that bracelet. So I'm hoping that perhaps over time it will wear in a little bit and perhaps those tolerances will sort of wear in a little bit and it won't strip the hairs off my wrist quite as much. But let's see how we go. Something that I was hoping that would be as nice as it is those yellow accents. I think they look absolutely brilliant. Let's get the chronograph feature going so you can see that Omega logo nicely. Everything's printed on there, looks cool. Yellow's nice. It's all over the dial, which really gives it something a little bit extra special. And the next thing that really stood out to me was the size. And it was something that really sort of concerned me a little bit. It was probably the only thing at the time that concerned me a little bit of this one because it's a 38mm, which is a nice size for me. But I kept thinking perhaps I'll get it in hand and think, I wish it was a tiny bit bigger. But that hasn't been a concern at all. I think partly because it's sort of all dial being this sort of style of watch and also having these pushers, it feels a little bit larger than a 38 on wrist. It really feels closer to a 39 or 40. Let's just give you a quick look over it because the last thing is the clasp, and I'll come back to that. Being an older watch, you'll know that it probably doesn't have a milled clasp, unfortunately, which perfectly is okay. I expected that, I'd known that. Finishing is certainly what I expect from an Omega, which is nice, even though it is an older Omega. It certainly is a bit next level, really nicely. Got the signed crown there, which is cool. Got a nice signed buckle there. You can see that's brand new. That's never been scratched, never been worn. Really, really impressive. But when you open this one up, you will see that is a press clasp there, which I guess that is what they were doing at the time. It would have been nice if it's a milled clasp, but that's okay. I can live with that. Simple case back Omega. Looks really cool. I'm so excited to be able to have this one in my collection. I do love the Omega brand, but it was always a bit of a, which one would I actually own if I was going to spend that amount of money? And this is the one that has stood out to me beyond any other Omega. And it's great because I was actually able to afford it, or at least afford it with a few sales of a few other watches in my collection to be able to purchase this one. And on wrist, I think it looks absolutely brilliant. This is my 6 3/4 or about 17 centimeter wrist. You'll see it actually fits in really nicely. Those pushes really give it a little bit more wrist presence. Sits down nicely on wrist as well. It's actually a fairly slim watch for a chronograph, which is really cool. But yeah, that bracelet, ripping their arm hairs off, which is a bit of a concern. I'm constantly now being mindful of that because it's, yeah. So obviously I can switch this over to a leather strap, but I just think it looks so good on this bracelet that I want to keep it on there. Now, normally I wouldn't do a full review of a second-hand watch or a 20-year-old watch, especially like this one. However, I think people in the future are going to be interested in this one. I think it is something rather special, and having something a little bit more in depth about it might be worthwhile. So once I get to know this watch a little bit better, I'll actually do a full review of it. But for the moment, maybe you should check out these videos next.